we would like to thank the following sponsors: Poland, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLG. Our association partners: Oshai, enhancing HSE and culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Asia. We would also like to welcome ManLib, Sudhir, powering the future; iRise India.
I could hear someone struggling to breathe then. I shouted to him, "Kev, are you okay?" I didn't get any response at all. I thought I'm going to have to get Kev down, so I managed to control the hoist. I got him down to the ground. He was slumped in the bucket, at the bottom of the bucket, really struggling to breathe. But the first thing that I saw was a big burn on the back of his neck. But the thing that I really remember vividly to this day is the smell, and it was a smell of burning flesh. That really sticks with me today, and I could see his arm was in a real mess as well. It was absolutely burnt. So Kev was out of it. He didn't know what day of the week it was. He wasn't making any sense at all. I was trying to reassure him everything was going to be okay, but I could see it wasn't.
He was thrashing about everywhere, and so his partner said, could I hold him down onto this pad, because he was thrashing everywhere and his head would have been banging the road.
He wasn't making any sense. He was just screaming, non-stop screaming.
I don't know how many of us there were trying to hold him, and the strength of him thrashing about. I've never seen anything like it.
I honestly thought at any second Kev was about to die. I didn't think he was going to last.
In that short time you get very sort of attached to someone, because he's someone's son, isn't he, or husband or whatever. At the end of the day, he's someone's son, and he was in a dreadful state.
Whilst I was driving there, things were going through my mind. well, what happened? How serious is it? I was driving down this lane, and at that point I saw the ambulance with its blue lights on coming in opposite direction. At that point I knew that this was pretty serious. When I got to site, Steve was standing there by himself, looking lost and not knowing what to do. And then he came over to me with a mobile phone, and it was Kevin's mobile phone, and the name on it was his wife. I took the call, and I had to explain to her that Kevin had had quite a serious accident and been taken to hospital, and she needed to make her way there as quick as she could. I got to hospital and I went into the family room where Kevin's wife and daughter were sitting there, very upset. I asked how Kevin was, and they turned around and said that they'd been told to expect the worst.
The first I heard of it was when Steve telephoned me. He sounded very shook up. I was immediately very shocked at what happened, very concerned. Later that evening, Steve came home, could see how upset he was. And then he mentioned that questions would be asked at work. And from my point of view, I was concerned that he would lose his job, and how would we manage? You know, we're a family. I only work part-time. He was the main breadwinner. We knew we couldn't survive. That went on for a long time. A lot of sleepless nights, just constant worry.
And I didn't go out that day anticipating any of this could happen. On the contrary, you know, we were just trying to do what was right for the customer. We just got too close on the day.
ME&SA are the safest way to do temporary work at height, but can be dangerous to both the operator and the people around them in untrained hands. IPAF promotes the safe and effective use of powered access worldwide. We work hard to ensure that our activities work towards a situation where there are no accidents. Unfortunately, each year there are still a significant number of accidents involving ME&SA, a small number of which result in a fatality. Approximately 60 fatal incidents are recorded annually to IPAF's Accident and Incident Reporting Database. This data repeatedly shows that the four main causes of fatal incidents are falls from a ME&SA at height, 36%, ME&SA overturn, 25%, entrapment between the ME&SA platform and overhead structure, 20%. Electrocution due to contact with high-voltage overhead cables, 13%. Paying close attention to this training and the associated practical examination, combined with regular practicing of what you've learnt, can help to ensure that you don't become part of these statistics.
we would like to thank the following sponsors: Bullet, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLG. Our association partners: Oshai, enhancing HSE and culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Asia. We would also like to welcome Man Lift, Sudhir, powering the future; iRise India. Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to Indian National Safety Week webinar. Today we will talk about we will talk about MUF knowledge and training. And before we start, I would like to introduce Jason Woods, IPAF Regional Manager for Middle East and South Asia, to give us a word.
Yes, good morning for those still in the Middle East, and good afternoon for those who is sat in India. Certainly, it's a pleasure to be online live, promoting safety. We have a fantastic week ahead of us. Each day we have different topics, and our drive is to certainly gain more knowledge and experience, and hopefully reduce the risk or potential risk of accidents. It's certainly an action-packed week, and a lot of work has been put into the sessions. I really thank the team behind the scenes for making this happen, and obviously our supporters. Really, truly appreciate your good hard work, as I've seen over the last few days. So yeah, my name Jason Woods, been based in the Middle East. We work in between South Asia, and we drive safety. Certainly our goal is to reduce certainly the accident level, and try and keep people safe so they go home the same way that they come to work each day. And I think that's important. Thank you, Ali.
Yes, thank you, Jason, for that wonderful remark. And I would like to introduce, for further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Pawan. Hi, Mr. Pawan.
Hello. Confirm my if I'm audible. Ali, can you confirm me if I'm audible?
Yes, you're on screen now and you're on live.
Yeah, so I'm audible, Ali?
Yes. You're good. Hi, Pawan.
Hi, Ali.
Would you like us to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
And how would you like to show, or what do you want us or our audience to know more on knowledge and training on MUPS?
Exactly. So thanks, Ali, and thanks, Jason, for having this session. Actually, this is something which is initiative should have been taken by most of us back in India. But good that people outside borders are having their keen interest and adding value to it. So first of all, it's a wonderful thing to do, especially when the safety week is on. And as one of the PPTs, Jason was showing that around 60 people, they have your database says 60 people die every year, when it's especially reported to your databases. Imagine the kind of situation that we'll have back at home, and where even the Factories Act and other acts are not so specific and remain gray on the role of MEWP. So we'll go ahead with the session, and thanks a lot, Jason and IPAF, for giving us this opportunity to talk about it to the larger crowd. Thanks.
And I would like to introduce to you Josie John. Hi, Mr. Josie John. Sir, you're on mute. You're going live.
Good afternoon, everybody, and especially Ali, Jason, and Pawan, who are currently on this team. IPAF is doing a great service to the industry. I would particularly say the construction industry, because I am from the construction industry, and their whole approach of validating people who are using the operators of power access equipment like MUPS, as well as providing the certification for them, is a great service they do to the construction industry. Because what we have seen in the construction industry over the past couple of decades is the use of MEWPs has really been ramped up, because construction has become we moved into a high speed, fast track construction, and into greater heights, into complicated areas, very congested areas. So in those kind of places, the use of MUPS has become very, very significant. And IPAF is leading from the front to ensure that people are trained, the right kind of equipment is being used also, so that the users will benefit from the kind of equipment. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation for all. So thank you, IPAF, to having organized this particular series of webinars this week, because this week is March 4th is a National Safety Day in India. And all over India, a lot of focus is brought on the topic of safety. And this particular subject is not much talked about, but IPAF wants to bring this into focus so that the users of MEWPs will be equipped to handle them, as well as the owners will also have an understanding of how the equipment has to be used, and the industry will benefit as a whole. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel for this discussion on the use of MEWPs in India. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. And as I've echoed in the last few days, appreciate your time. I know you're both very busy people. And this week is massive for India. When we talk about safety, I wouldn't say that safety in India is only for 1 week. That's not what we're trying to do. All what we're trying to do is add value to the additional weeks, which the workforce is certainly out there in the field. What I've done today is to cover a few bulletin points where we can raise some discussions. I'm probably ahead of the game a minute because India Safety Week is on the 4th of March. So we've snuck in a little bit early just to try and pick up the pace ready for the 4th of March. But yeah, we have grown a lot, all of us, in terms of safety and safety requirements over the last few years, and India especially. And Josie, I think you touched on something there in relation to construction, meaning that it's become very busy in terms of buildings being built. I've seen an increase of steelwork being moved around different regions of India, which naturally, once the steelwork comes in, then somebody has to go up, meaning working at height, and then kind of the construction project follows whatever it may be. So I think really just an open discussion to start with. You know, where are we currently with knowledge of this type of equipment? I think Pawan, you see it a lot when you're on the ground in projects, working with clients. Naturally, there's a divide between a client and a contractor. Certainly, the client will set the rules in a sense, and the contractor must oblige by the rules. And correct me if I'm wrong. But how do we feel at the moment? Where are we currently? Are we all kind of singing off the same hymn sheet? Are we all on the same page from contractor and client and vice versa? What's your feel for this?
Yeah, so Jason, principally we are at a time of aspirations. So we have wish lists, and we work with around 300 clients across globe, and most of them in India. So they are aspirational towards it, and the biggest gap I would say that is standardization of knowledge. So even though I'm aspirational, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I'm aspirational, and I need to learn A to Z, but then I need to have a textbook to understand that, right? Which is very much clear into my understanding. And then even though I learn it, how do I transfer it to the whole organization value chain? Like Josie sir is there. I mean, so every client are aspirational. There is a gray area in the legislation, and those gray areas are extreme gray areas because those, even though somebody refers a Factories Act, those are holistically, those are general knowledge-based things. And the moment the Indian clients are looking outwards to the organizations like yours or any other, then the challenges, aspiration, value chain has two different levels. So the moment I want to adopt, suppose I'm running a factory and I need to adopt MEWP standards from your organization, then I have no clue that what ISO will talk about and how we can relate it to India. So the moment, even though I remain aspirational, I have, as a client, when I say I mean as an end user, I don't have a clear vision that what I'm supposed to do. So, and the second biggest trouble and problem that I see in Indian clients are they outsource and hire these kind of equipment a lot. So even though you remain aspirational, do you pass on your aspirations to your vendors? And even though you pass out, how do you measure it? Because every project, because MEPW is an operation, is an money-oriented machine for a factory. Every second delay in implementing these machines are actually killing certain projects or certain production. So it's a key thing to have. So there is a speed, then there is an expectation, then there is a vendor who was nearby. So it's all the gray areas that I personally feel like, you know, that kills the whole value chain. But the kind of things that is being happening, what is happening now, maybe in next 3 to 4 years, once we have a clear-cut legislation in place and clear-cut knowledge books available that I need to follow, that's the only thing. And the kind of things that you're running in, that is going to add value.
Okay, excellent. And Josie, obviously you're a well-travelled professional from Middle East across back to South Asia. What's your experiences from the client's major contractor and then moving into subcontractors? How good are risk assessments? What's your view on this? How thorough are these things?
I came to India in 2012, moved to India from the Middle East, and I joined L&T as the head of safety for the Mumbai airport. Now, what really surprised me was that on that project, there were 64 MEWPs operating. I've not seen that kind of numbers even operating any of the projects I had handled in the Middle East. And on top of that, I think the main supplier was ME&SA. I don't still remember. I think they're still around. They were very professional in the way they were doing it. They had regular training sessions for all the operators. So for me, when I came from a project where we probably had about 10 or 12. From there, I moved to a project where there's 64 of them. It was a huge ramp up of my whole approach. And I was really happy to see that the India I left in the early 90s was not the India I came back 20 years later. In the 90s, 80s, and 90s, the work was more manual. People had to manually do the job. But then, with larger projects, fast-track projects, shorter deadlines, slowly mechanization came in. And that mechanization led to the use of MEPW. I'm not just talking about just since this is a session on MEWPs, I see that more and more contractors started realizing the benefit of using an MEWP. So much so they started costing that also in their projects so that they could use the full benefit of it and go forward. And to have 64 MEWPs on a project was huge. And the terminal building with this huge floor area, a lot of works on the ceiling. For example, the ceiling at the departure hall was 14 meters, and you had a lot of light fixtures, electrical fittings. A lot of stuff had to go, and you had to use a mixed kind of MEWPs. You had scissors lift in use. You had the aerial platforms with the boom lift. Multiple, as well as there was a lot of work outside happening where you had lampposts which had to be accessed, etc. So I see that there is a huge shift in the Indian construction industry. I still remember the first time I heard about MEWP, the term used was a cherry picker. So I was quite inquisitive to why it's known as a cherry picker. This was way back in the 90s when I was in the Middle East. So one of my colleagues from the UK said, well, in Europe, etc., during the fruit picking season, we use this equipment to pluck off cherries. And that is where it all started off. And then soon it came into the construction industry with a full bang, and it became used all over the place. So currently in India also we have these equipment used left, right, all over the place. In fact, all the projects that are consulting engineers, we are currently having more than 100 projects running all over the place. And almost all the projects where there is height work, there is the use of MEWPs. At least one MEPW would be there on the site, either as an aerial lift or a boom lift or even scissors lift. I had a very interesting incident while I was in the airport. There was some material had to be lifted up to above the ceiling, where there's a huge walkway running into a couple of kilometers, and hand railing has to be fixed. So they were using an electric winch, and they were using it, and finally that electric winch kind of failed. Then they shifted to a manual way of lifting up using pulleys. And that's when I said, you see, there's a scissors lift available here. Why don't you use it? So this engineer immediately tells us, sir, the scissors lift will get tired. It cannot work in the night. I asked him, is it the scissors lift or is it the operator? Then he realized his mistake. No, it's not the equipment as such. It is the scissors lift operator. So then I said, that's not a problem. Let's engage a night shift so that this material can be shifted, whereas the original intent for which. So there was less understanding of how to use the scissors lift. But then after that, I saw, the improved or increased use of these equipment everywhere. For example, even the state electricity boards, when you have to change the lamps on your electric lamps around the place, they're using these boom lifts. But my whole fear is when I see it on the road, whether these guys have been trained properly in order to use it. And knowing how the government sector works, they probably wouldn't even have given a thought about it. And that's where I keep saying that IPAF has brought in a great focus, trying to get people to understand why we need to have proper training. One of the incidents which we had about 5 years back on a project in South Africa was we had a fatality while somebody was using one of these equipment. He accidentally pressed the lever which sends it up, and he got stuck in between two steel beams, and that was a fatal accident. And after that, it's always been very disturbing. So whenever I see a MEWP being operated, I usually ask questions to the operator himself whether he knows how to use it. And we in TCE, we have a very rigorous procedure that in all our contracts, all our contractors have to ensure that the operators are all trained and they have to demonstrate their competence. Now, all of them would not be trained by IPAF, but they have their own ways of ensuring that they are trained and they're brought in. But when we talk about IPAF, it's more formal, a very well recognized body. There is a professional way in how the whole training is being done. So that has a lot of advantages. And a big challenge that I've also seen in different places is that the guys who are sitting on the top would be probably a welder or a fitter or a fabricator or a scaffolder, but they are not trained to do the operation of the machine. And sometimes that bucket is allowed to carry maybe 150 kilograms. The two guys themselves would weigh about 150 kilograms. Beyond that, they'll have their tools and other stuff coming in. So what do? They put a guy at the bottom to ask him to operate the equipment. And that is a sure recipe for an accident to occur, because the lack of attention, the lack of communication can definitely lead to a situation where instead of the boom going up, you might find the boom even going down, or the other way around, and that leads to accident. So much so, even though manufacturers will not agree with me, what I usually recommend is that 4 poles are kept in the corners of the basket, and a frame is erected so that it is above the head of these guys. So even if there's a situation where this goes up, it will not hit their heads. And in fact, I've talked to some of these manufacturers and I told them, please consider this rather than just having a bucket with maybe up to only about 1 meter or 1.1 meter, and the person is still exposed to the elements outside. So probably that might come as a change in the coming years when manufacturers realize that this becomes an additional protection for people who are within the bucket, so that they do not inadvertently, if they press the button, which the controls takes them off to a side or to the top, they will not have their heads banging the top. So it's a very interesting scenario. So many things keep happening on construction sites, and the use of MEWPs are here to stay. It's not going to go away. What we require is to have more sophisticated equipment coming with more features in it. And of course, as the equipments get upgraded to newer versions and models, more training would also be required. And operators are very proud when some of them do have some kind of an training card, and they show it to here, so is my card. I am authorized to drive this or operate this, and it's with a sense of pride these guys who are actually operating the equipment. They feel quite empowered that they know to actually how to operate this equipment. So I think this is a good topic that IPAF has brought about this safety week, and I don't know, safety is not just 1 week, but it's 24/7. That's basically what it is. You can't say 1 week and the rest of the year we keep it, we store it up or keep it away and dust all the files and bring it back around the 4th of March. But that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Now, currently, for example, TC is taking up the project management consultant for the bullet train project, probably the biggest and the most prestigious project in India, and globally one of the biggest projects. And the use of MEWPs, it's going to be in the numbers, it's going to be in the hundreds. And we've already brought in systems to ensure that some kind of training would be done for all these operators. And maybe IPAF might come into the picture to ensure that the competence of the guys are also established. That's my thoughts, which I wanted to put up at this point.
Some very interesting points, Josie, and hence why I wanted you to join us today, because your wealth of knowledge from travel and then taking these kind of standards back to India is certainly massive for the Indian market. So just a couple of things and Power, and I think that this involves yourself also. I think that we are seeing an increase of elevating work platforms. We're now reaching more than 7,000 units, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's growing, and it's growing very fast. And the interesting thing about this is that we're seeing that it's not just one type of lift, so meaning that cherry picker, Josie, as you relate to. There's scissor lift machines available. There's vertical lifts designed for one person. And then we have a range of boom types, which could be articulated or straight boom, and they both do different jobs. There's a lot of add-ons here as well, because we could talk about safe working loads and dynamics of machine lift as well. So, it's amazing how things are changing, and how India as a country is certainly progressing to a higher scale. Josie, you mentioned one thing which I had here in the Middle East when I arrived all these years back, we were still seeing or experience a lot of steel scaffolding being used at 8 meters high. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to move a steel scaffolding at 8 meters high, but it takes a lot of strength, and the potential risk of tip over is massive, because a typical construction site don't have great housekeeping, and the route from A to B of the move can be challenging. So we had these kind of challenges where I think from my experience with India especially, we still see a lot of bamboo scaffolding being used on not tier 1 type projects. Pawan, you'll probably see this a lot more when you're out in the field. So the equipment element has been quite a change, I think, over the last few years. So some more interesting points, Josie, which you've mentioned, is the operator. You were pleased to see the equipment arrive at the project. But my question really back is, how good is the operator? Is he trained enough to certainly lift and lower that platform into position? Yes, it's a very good piece of equipment and it's very safe, but surely the safety only becomes in a trained hand. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that, hey, everybody needs an IPAF card by tomorrow. We would never cope. But I think that there's steps in the ladder which we should be approaching. And the steps should be, first step, let's have a bit more awareness of this type of equipment, so that people are a little bit more familiar with this type of equipment. Naturally, training, we have to level this out. Is a familiarization classed as a training session? Or should we be thinking ahead of that? Should familiarization actually be after training? And the reason why I'm going to pause on this is because when we look at the dynamics of machines, we have great friends in India from Hullet, Snorkel, Skyjack, and many more. There's different controls, different levers. That skilled, trained hand should be competent to go and lift at that height where he needs to position the platform. And again, Josie, we had it in the Middle East. We still have it in some regions where familiarization kind of overtakes training. But it's actually the other way around. We should be focusing on. And I wonder, is this going back then to the contractor, whether it's a contractor standard for the project? Should we be setting these benchmarks? Because if we set it a little bit higher than standard, surely we're in a position which we're being proactive then and reducing that potential risk. Whereas traditionally, we slip, I think, as a region, as an industry, that an accident happens and then we think, wow, what are we going to do about it? I think that we should just sit back a little bit here and maybe think, okay, we're going to have a lot of these pieces of equipment on my project. Surely we want to aim to a trained workforce and trained operators, but what's our first step? Should we be talking toolbox talks? If the machine is arriving, should the machines or should the contractors who's receiving the machines be competent enough to do pre-use inspections? That's where I'm trying to aim on. Okay.
I need to add here, Jason. So I'll start with adding certain points to what Josie has said and what you raised. We need to understand that Indian factories, most of them are old ones, maybe 10, 20-year-old, because the greenfield price is still less than India because of demand supply. So those factories, as you mentioned, bamboo stakes, from the age of bamboo stake to scaffold to more structured scaffold to the machines, those were designed with a perception of working in those kind of environment. So what we have done at one point of time, of course, these machines have made the life easier, faster, and possibly they have also brought the risk closer to us because it's easy to uplift, lift, and then we can go further to the further height where we can operate it way easier. So what is happening? We are going close to the ceiling. We are going close to the high voltage cables. We are going close to, per se, a high temperature piping. So parallelly it has gone up. So when you talk about the kind of toolbox talk or what kind of risk that we need to assess, we need to understand that how we are going to inculcate these sets of issues, prospective Indian factories, and maybe IPAF or any other organization per se can bring these value to the training that this is what the risk is. Now, my other concern is with the worst of the worst, imagine the situation of the worst incident that may happen in these machines, the exposure to people are still limited because with an assumption that it's in properly peripheral area, it's a locked area, so there are few guys who are working with the machines nearby. So the risk exposure to the number of people, I may sound a bit odd when I say this, is limited. So that means the moment we have a limited exposure, that means it will be much easier to train because then we know how many people we need to train. So identification of those who are supposed to be trained, perspective who is handling or who is in charge for mobilizing those equipment, and people who are exposed to that particular risk is one. Parallelly, all the kind of risk that both of you were talking about, either approaching a ceiling, or being entangled into it, or tilting, a beyond tilt, all are, I principally believe, those can be solved by tech. So why I'm putting this point right away is training in India and believing that the training output will come equivalently as you will get in UAE or UK or US, there is a gap. So even though you train equal, you give them certificates to everyone, there is a cultural difference of getting trained and implementing it on ground. It is there. I mean, if we do not accept this, then there is no point because we need to accept to improve. So I find that the same training that we impart globally has a different outcome back in our own country. So having said that, OEM must play a bigger role into it. But the reason why I'm saying OEM must play a bigger role, because they should come with certain minimum safety measures into it, as Jyoti sir said, features. I'll go more into the depth of what kind of tech can resolve most of the training. I'm not denying training; it has to be extremely in depth, but parallelly it should be backed up by certain help to the people who are operating those machines. So I just listed a few of them. So it is something which is predicting the failures. So there are historical databases with the number of machines that we are globally having. So that is one. Second thing is predicting the tilt. The balancing of these machines plays a lot of role. Even though you have whatever condition you have for safe weight and any other parameter, the basic assumption is there is no tilt or there is defined tilt. So how do you correct those tilting perspective, the weight governance or correction factor for the weight? So tilting measurement and auto correction, or at least alert to the operator. Rate of rise. So every machine, since morning I have gone through a lot of spec sheet of different manufacturers. How do we define the rate of rise per X meter per second? Because that derives the whole need of training, because then how fast I'm supposed to operate for which parameter, right? So that transition has to go. The pressure of the hydraulic. What is the safer operation parameters? I mean, when we train them, if you look at the ISO numbers or ISO training materials, those are guidelines basically. But the moment you go to spec sheet, you find more real-time engineering issues, which are finally transferred to end users, and especially in the safety department. But those are more of engineering issue. And the good news for this kind of equipment is most of them can be controlled. I'd say almost all can be controlled by engineering norms. So training should be aided by engineering norms. We can even talk about vibrations, which will give you alert that when you need to stop. How many MEWP comes with a vibration alert, that what kind of vibration that you're looking at. It will take care of the weight issue, it will take care of tilt and weight alignment both, and as well as any maintenance issues that overall structure may face. So these are very holistic things that I believe OEM should take a lead, and of course OEM will take lead only if there is a backup push on them to take a lead on it. And the second thing is, when you talk about toolbox talks of training, my concern is that how we are localizing those trainings. Because if I go through any organization of your kind, into understanding their training principle, then there is basic assumptions underlying. Those assumptions are good maintained equipment, because then if I'm the guy who's I'm going to move that particular MEWP, then I have an assumption that this typical equipment is perfect to move. That's my underlying assumption as an operator, right? And it's an underlying to you too as a trainer. But the governance of these mixed two will give the actual confidence of delivering those results on ground. So how do you, or how any other organization, customize these kind of training? Prospective user behavior, prospective maintenance behavior, prospective end user behavior, and hiring behavior. into your training module, because even though we give a pass certificate, how these 4 factors, which remains totally different in India, is being taken care in any kind of training that we may provide
Yeah.
to them. Right. So these are a few of the points that actually worries me, that but this is the only route we can take. So what route you and Joyce are saying, that is the only route we can take, and there is no magic that will happen a day.
Yeah.
But there's a route. But these are the certain anxieties that I have on perspective of using these things in India and training and tech.
So I think there's two. Well, both of you have raised some very important topics there. The level of training is massive. Let's be fair, and we should step it. And what do we need right now, and where do we want to gain? And that's potentially our goal. In terms of some of the pointers, Pawan, that you've mentioned, like the tilt sensor for reading the gradient or working on a slope, as we would all know. Naturally, these machines will have a built-in sensor, safety sensor, which will read. But I think importantly, as safety professionals, what we should remember is we should also have a duty to know what that slope reading is also, so we can relate it back to the specification sheet, the data plate. So we're not kind of waiting for that alarm to happen whilst we're elevated and think, well, now I'm in a tilt and a tip over position. So they should, and they are safety devices which should be tested from the rental company or even the owner if it's owned equipment, because many companies will own their own equipment. And part of the OEM warranty, they would be asked to test the tilt sensor maybe every quarter, for an example. But I think also, Pawan, we must remember the direction. So are we driving up the slope? Are we driving down the slope or across the slope? So again, these kind of, some people would call it technical data, but it's an overview of movement of that particular platform. I want to step back slightly to something which Josie had actually mentioned, is we have a risk of somebody banging their head. We call it entrapment. I'm going to do a talk on day 3 about entrapment in a much more depth, because it is a bit of a headache for us in all countries, not just in one region. Josie, the machines today have certainly increased safety performance. And entrapment goes back a very, very long time, even back as far as 2007 of development of these machines. The concept is that we have an alert, if you like, before we reach that platform position. There are features on machines which can give us this alert. Now, there's 2 types. One is an electronic version, which will alert the user, which is great because now we reduce that risk of being pushed in that entrapped position. Or the other one, which we're relating to, is what we call the sanctuary zone. So it's a physical piece of equipment. The only thing what I would come away from, Josie, when you say that you've in the past said to contractors, even a wooden pole is better than 0. The concept is kind of you're heading in the right direction, but this also falls under MUP modification. And if you think of the day the MUP is born, the standard, all machines are calculated from the base to the height, similar to scaffolding, I guess. And when we're branding it as a EN280 machine for 30 feet in height, then from base to height is what we're trying to achieve. The moment any modifications come, it can affect the performance. So that's something which we have to be a little bit cautious with. And that's probably why OEMs don't like that kind of, that approach. But the concept is that we want to save operators and reduce the risk from them getting trapped. And it's obvious. When also, Pawan, you mentioned, I forgot what I was going to say now. You mentioned the movement of platform in terms of, I've got it, hydraulic speed. Now that is massive, and any good rental company should be checking the lift speed as well as the lowering speed, the drive speed, the elevated drive speed, because again, going back to OEMs, through that design factor, then there's a specific requirement. If for some reason, Pawan, that platform is moving way too fast like a roller coaster, we know we have an issue. Josie, that falls under my entrapment section again now, because perhaps that something is happening too fast. So certainly, these are very strong topics here, and I think that there are certainly a lot of depth in these topics. But I think the first step is we need to try and find a way on how we can share more knowledge to help the HSE professionals on site, the practitioners who's having to manage the risk assessment, the rescue plan. As you can see on the back end slide, we generally see a lot in India, especially a lot of operational from the ground. And Josie, again, you mentioned this earlier on. We come away from this. And the reason for that is because the ground controls are there for function checks and emergency descent only. All the operational of movement for AM day in, day out should always be done through the platform controls. And I think that's certainly, two key areas there which we should look at. We want to be here to, all of us, I'm sure, wants to be here to help India grow. The machines are coming. They're coming very fast. The projects, Josie, as you've mentioned, are certainly, streamlining at a fast pace. There's a lot of steel being moved in India through your plantations. And then moving back to yourself, Pawan, I think that it's the contractors, safety people, then we need to be on the same page and same language as the contractor. It's easy to say on a webinar like this, I'm sure, but we need to think of solutions, I think, to start thinking of how can we actually start embedding these kind of basic steps, if that makes sense. What's your first thoughts on these guys? What can we do?
Chad, I think one of the issues that you have also raised is, and I've also talked about, is the operators being on the ground and the guys on the top. Why that happens is because primarily the equipment is outsourced. It is not with the main contractor itself. So what happens is the guy who's hiring out his equipment, he wants to be sure that his equipment is taken care of. So that's why he does not want anybody else to be touching the equipment, operating the equipment. So this is where we need to find out via media where other tradesmen, like a welder or a carpenter or a painter or a pipe fitter or even a fire alarm technician, they are also trained. Probably IPAF can sell this idea, or listen, you guys can be trained to operate these machines, and you will be in control of the machine when it's actually working. Per se, I always see that the machines as such do not have a problem. The problem is the way that it is handled. It's the same like, whether it's a car or any of them. It's very interesting to see that when people buy a new car, what do? They either get a priest from the church or from somewhere else and ask him to bless the car. I said that's the most stupidest thing to do, because the car by itself will not, on a runaway mode, go and create an accident. It's actually the person who is driving it is the real cause for that accident. So it's the same thing over here also, no? You have people thinking that the equipment is the problem. The equipment is not the problem. It is the person who are operating it. So we have to get this change, a paradigm shift, that it's not the operator at the ground. The ground level controls are for any emergency, but rather the person who's sitting in the bucket with the live controls is the person to do it. And that will probably take a little time for major organizations to really understand it. And wherever possible, whenever I mentioned earlier, when I do any site visit inspections, I put this as a recommendation. I cannot force this on a contractor, but I always put this as a recommendation and tell them it will be cheaper for you to hire the plain equipment, have your guys trained, rather than have an equipment with the operator coming in. So that's additional cost. Some contractors have realized that. They said, yes, you're right. Why do we have to pay extra for an operator when our own people, if they can be trained? And that's where IPAF will be able to step in, sell this idea, get this across, to have guys who will be carrying the IPAF card other than operators, and they will be very good in because they are the ones who are negotiating. They actually know the inner, once you're up above the ground, they are the ones who actually know the roads, the paths through which the equipment has to move. So this is probably something which IPAF, and when you look at the different aspects which IPAF offers, it's 100%. Nothing has been left out, and I think it's a great way to go forward.
Yeah.
So exactly, just to add, Jason here, just like what Joey sir said right now is in perfect way to actually move in, and parallelly we need to add it in certain management controls into it. And when I say management control, that says that in an Indian condition perspective, which areas of the factory we must not use it. That also needs to be defined, because those areas were never meant to be operated with these kind of equipment, right? Even though with all kind of modern modifications. So of course, training them, identifying those areas where we must not work with these equipment is one thing that risk assessment has to be done and defined with ROIs at what happens if we buy a new one at our own facility. And second thing is, of course, every point what Joyce has said remains as it is. So I'm adding certain points of mine. So that's integration of risk identification of where we cannot use it. Second is it should be a part of kind of a PSM or a kind of integral part of maintenance book. It should be a 52-week plan in the plan. It cannot be treated as a standalone equipment that will be used only if there is a requirement. It should be a part of line item of the production element that you maintain even though it is working fine. So it should be taken care in the part of machinery, because it's an actual machine which is helping out in each kind of overall equipment effectiveness. Those are main production equipment. So these are three things I would like to add.
So a lot of emphasis on the management sector, pretty much, whether it's coming in as an owned piece of equipment or rental. I think there's two areas, Pawan, here to look at: is who's going to operate it? Is it the tradesman, or is it the operator supplied by a rental company? And I think the first step for us is to make sure that the operator is trained correctly, whether he's a tradesman or whether he's actually employed by a rental company. And the real emphasis why I mention here is certainly because if we got the training in our mindset correctly, surely then our risk of incident is reduced to start off with. As Josie has mentioned, whether we decide is continually the operator supplied by the rental company, or does it move into the tradesman? I'm a great advocate that the tradesman should be a good person to train, because he's with the machine 24/7. He understands the site rules of safety rules. He knows the project. He knows the job which he's having to work at height in. How many controls do I need to understand? Well, on a typical boom, let's call it 15 controls. They're not all lift, some are drive, and on a scissor lift is probably a half a dozen. So would the tradesman have the ability to be trained? Of course he could. As you can see on the back end slide, which we have, this is some of the work which we've done in the Middle East over the last few years. It's taken kind of, some time to develop, and it does take time to embed. It's certainly a legal document, if that makes sense. But I think, all jokes aside, what we should think about is whether we're working in India or the Middle East, there is set guidelines by governments and state that if I'm going to use a piece of equipment, then I must be trained. It doesn't always say you must have an IPAF qualification. It doesn't say we must have a NEBOSH qualification. It just uses that, define that terminology of trained and competent. And I think, certainly as project leaders and contractors, perhaps that this is where we should be thinking is, let's have a clean piece of paper and let's call it a company policy. If this equipment is coming on our project, then these would be the set guidelines. And I just wonder, Josie, whether that's where we should be aiming for the minute as first base, to raise the bar, if that makes sense. As I say, that this is kind of the work which I've been developing over the last, let's call it 12 years in the Middle East. So you can see, that there is a change of movement. We do train a lot of people now in the Middle East, but we also have started training a lot of people in India. Last year, we've seen nearly 500 students trained on the safe use of operating this equipment. It doesn't sound a lot really, but it actually is when you think that we have around 7,000 machines. So, we're seeing now more and more management tiers of training. This is why one of the reasons why I wanted to give India something special, and certainly for everybody who's registered through these sessions, they can walk away with a free ME&SA for Managers training course. What does that mean? It means that if I'm having to deal with this equipment on my project, now I'm able to have a bit more knowledge. Pawan, you spoke about tilt sensors. Guess what? It's on ME&SA for Managers. Josie, you spoke about entrapment. Guess what? It's heavily bedded into ME&SA for Managers. So we're kind of spinning a few plates here on trying to help safety practitioners certainly walk that same path as us then.
Precisely, yes, Jason. This is how it's going to be. I mean, there is no different thoughts on it. So there is a way, and the slide that I'm looking at right now, and the kind of work IPAF has done for different country, and I think this is where the kind of document I spoke in the very beginning, that even though we remain aspirational, we need guidance, and guidance perspective is it's a kind of Bible or Gita which we must follow with a vision of 2 to 3 years from where we can pick it up. So the first thing and foremost thing that we have to go beyond Factories Act, or if not going beyond, then it's updated with the most modern way of managing the new equipment. As you said, India is growing and India is bound to grow. So it is bound to have more and more machines landing here and from different parts of the world. And certain Indian companies will be putting their own machines. So it has to be balanced out, perspective import or locally developed equipment. I believe it should be more and more local things, but the standardization has to be global.
I think it's exciting times, I think, for all of us. And as Josie has mentioned, there's some great, exciting projects, which there has been for some time. Okay, we've had to deal with a pandemic, which everybody had to change their style of business, I guess. And it has been tough, but I think that we're standing strong, correct me if I'm wrong, and it makes us stronger. We're certainly, I think, more alert in terms of what do we want and how do we get there. I'm really pleased to see that some good practices are happening in India. And when you talk to manufacturers, which we have on day 4 of this week, you will see, on how manufacturers are putting their presence strong in India also to help the market develop. So it kind of mirrors from project safety, from manufacturing elements. And these key things like overload devices, overreach devices, entrapment safety alerts, tilt sensors, it becomes then certainly a good tick box for us, I think, and it helps us in the project. So I know we've slightly running over time, guys, so I do apologize for that, but we have 2 great leaders on the screen today on the webinar, and for me that's certainly this is what India safety is all about. Can I open the floor for any questions, guys? We've had a few come in, I think, which has been typed in. So I don't know if they're real direct questions or whether they are simply just observations. So let's see what we have. So Ali, do we have any questions for the guys?
So there was a question on forklift. I mean, not linked to this, but someone asked that do a forklift operator requires a driving license?
So in terms of, I don't know who the question is based at. As IPAF, we don't cover forklift truck training at the moment. The only thing what we may cover in the future is when we're adding a platform to the forks. Without letting too much out of the bag a minute, I have been working on a presentation for a...
Can I answer this, Jason?
Yes.
So there are certain forklifts which are registered under Motors Act. You will find a number plate. The moment you find a number plate, it goes under Motors Act, and then you need a driving license. If it is not classified under the Act, then the local training and other certifications will work. Yeah. Sandeep.
So essentially, that is, if it is registered with a number plate is what is required. But till now, I have not found any of these boom lifts or man lifts, MEWPs which have been registered.
Because we are using the smaller one,
Authority.
so actually it doesn't goes under the Motors Act.
Yeah, it's not registered with the Transport Authority. Therefore, you don't find it doesn't come under the driving license requirements. Yes, but these lifts also need specialized training. They have the chances of accidents, including fatal accidents, occurring. So all that's agreed. Counterweight principle, all those things are agreed. But at the moment, I think forklifts which are taken on the road, registered under the Regional Transport Authority, they require people who have licenses to operate them.
And I'll just add on, because I noticed that the forklift question did also revert to new equipment. The only time, 99% of the time, you do not need to have a driving license as such to operate an elevated work platform. The only time this really comes into question is if you're going to drive it on a commercial road. If it's a public road. If it's a construction site, then it's certainly it acts as a separate license, which would mean for an operator. So I hope that answers the question. I have too many questions for you guys. You've actually got away quite lightly, I think. So yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to find questions. Why don't we go for local regulations first? I think it's very challenging to raise regulations, and I think it takes a lot of research before you start embedding a standard or a regulation. Correct me if I'm wrong. As a regulator, we need to do a lot of research there to see our direction. Does that make sense?
First, it needs a will and a need. So as an end user, Tarun or us, do we demand it? If we demand it, then probably we may get it maybe in a year or 10. But do we demand it other than these platforms? So probably that answers the most basic question.
I think what I look at it as, self-regulation is the best way forward, because you are setting up a higher benchmark on which to work, and that is what will drive safety in any industry. You set up higher benchmarks, as we would say as best practice, and you follow it. Regulations will always be there, but it takes a lot of time for regulations to come in place. Instead, follow best practices, set your own benchmarks to work at a higher level, because we do find this happening when we have multinational clients who demand a much higher level of safety management, whereas we also do government projects which nobody cares. There you have to rely on the BOCW Act and go into the regulation mode. But here, when you work with a multinational client, they want the best practices that are happening in Europe to be implemented on their particular project also. So self-regulation is the way forward.
I would totally agree with you, Josie. And the pretty obvious one is, if you don't know how to bring the platform back down to the safe zone, then please don't lift it in the first place, because it can be quite challenging on the way back. And it's just, standing back and thinking of the A to Z of how we're going to manage this equipment as self-regulation. Maybe the laws will change, but correct me if I'm wrong, today, even in India, it states that we must be trained and competent. So how do you define that? We certainly, we can keep going on this, I think, really. But you've got to think of how do you want to work safely with the platform, and if that means that you've got to embed a pre-use inspection checklist on your site, then please embed it. If you need a toolbox talk on the safe use of the equipment, please embed it. So yeah, some very good topics covered today, guys, and I'm certainly, I wanted to hear your experience and knowledge, and the audience can certainly see it. So what we're going to do is we'll take one more question, and then we will take a close then for today, because I know that we're taking up a bit of your time, guys. My queries are specific legal documents guidance. Okay, Tarek, one of our instructors from the UAE, has asked a question. It's nice to hear your opinion. My queries are, is there any specific legal documents, guidance for MUPs, MUP operators, or operator training in India? I don't, for myself, I don't think I've ever come across anything specific.
No, there is nothing specific except overall holistic guiding. You can use the element 29 of Factories Act. That is holistic, but there is nothing specific.
Yeah. What about yourself, Josie? Have you come across?
Yeah, there's nothing specific. It's again, I said individual industries set their own best practice, formulate your own guidelines, and go ahead. If you wait for the law, it'll take another couple of decades before it actually comes into place.
Decades, I said you'll say years. All right.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to take a close now, guys. Certainly, thank you very much for your time. Two very highly rated, very professionals in the industry, and I know very passionate of safety as well. Josie and Pawan, I've worked alongside you guys for many years now, and I see what you guys deliver. So it's a big credit to you guys, and certainly enjoy the week. This week. So I will close the session now. We are back live again tomorrow, which we're going to talk about safety harnesses, the topic that nobody likes to listen, and how it relates to safety, because naturally a safety harness or a safety belt is there to support the operator and the passengers, of course, whilst they're in the platform. So again, another hot topic tomorrow, and we will start at the same time. So thank you very much for the audience who's attended, and again, thank you very much to the both presenters today, and really appreciate working alongside you. And thanks to the team who's put this together for us, and naturally our sponsors and supporters. And we can't do events like this without having a team, and I think that speaks for itself. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Namaste from India. Thank you, Joy sir. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for inviting to this special event to kickstart your whole program. You know, both Pawan and me, we feel honored that you gave us that privilege, even though we may not be right there at the top in terms of the professional safety circuit. There are other big names, but we want to contribute what little bit we could. So thank you very much, Jason, Pawan, as well as IPAF and the other supporters and sponsors. And we hope that this week the topics that you picked up would be well received, and the knowledge of those who are participating will also increase. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
We would like to thank the following sponsors: Poland, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLG. Our association partners: Oshai, enhancing HSE and culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Asia. We would also like to welcome ME&SA, Sudhir, powering the future; iRise India,